Rosa wiped the sweat from her forehead as she pushed the cleaning cart through the back entrance of the Lincoln Center. It was 4:30 in the morning, and the city was still asleep. The only sounds were her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, and the distant hum of traffic from the streets outside. She had been working as a cleaner at this famous concert hall for almost 3 years now. Every day was the same routine. Arrive before dawn, clean the offices, mop the floors, dust the chairs, and make everything perfect before the musicians arrived. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and helped her send money back home to her family. Rosa came from a small town in Guatemala where music was everywhere. Street musicians played on every corner, and families would gather in the evenings to sing together. But learning to play an instrument, that was for rich people. Her family could barely afford food, let alone piano lessons or a fancy guitar. When she was 19, Rosa made the difficult decision to leave everything behind and come to America. She packed one small suitcase and carried dreams bigger than the mountains surrounding her village. She thought she would find opportunities here, maybe go to school, learn English properly, and build a better life. But reality hit hard. Without a college degree or perfect English, the only jobs available were cleaning offices, washing dishes in restaurants, or working in factories. Rosa chose cleaning because it gave her some freedom to think while she worked. And somehow she had ended up in this beautiful place where music lived. The Lincoln Center was like a palace to her. The marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, and the walls were covered with pictures of famous musicians from around the world. Sometimes late at night, when everyone had gone home, Rosa would walk through the main concert hall just to feel the magic in the air. But there was one room that called to her more than any other: the practice room with the grand piano. Every morning, Rosa saved this room for last. She would take extra time cleaning around the beautiful black piano, running her cloth gently over its smooth surface. The piano was huge, much bigger than any instrument she had ever seen. Its keys were like perfect white and black teeth, and when tiny specks of dust settled on them, Rosa would carefully clean each one. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, Rosa would press one key very softly just to hear the sound it made. The note would ring out pure and clear, filling the room with something that felt like hope. She would quickly look around to make sure no one had heard, then continue with her work. Rosa lived in a tiny apartment in Queens with 2 other women who also worked cleaning jobs around the city. The apartment was old and cramped with thin walls and a heater that barely worked in winter. Her bedroom was so small that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. But it was cheap, and every dollar she saved meant more money she could send to her mother and little brother back home. Her mother had been sick for 2 years now, and the medical bills were piling up. Her brother was only 15 and still in school. Rosa's father had left when her brother was born, so it was just the 3 of them trying to survive. Rosa knew that her family depended on the money she sent every month, so she worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when she could find extra jobs. The work was hard on her body. Her back ached from bending over to clean floors, and her hands were always dry and cracked from the cleaning chemicals. But Rosa never complained. She had learned early in life that complaining didn't change anything. You just had to keep working and hope that tomorrow might be a little better than today. During her lunch breaks, Rosa would sometimes sit in the empty concert hall and imagine what it would be like to hear music in this space. She had seen pictures in magazines of people in fancy clothes sitting in these red velvet seats, listening to orchestras and piano players. It seemed like a different world, one that people like her could only dream about. But Rosa had a secret that no one knew about. 2 years ago, her neighbor Mrs. Chen was moving to a nursing home and couldn't take all her belongings. She had offered Rosa an old electronic keyboard that didn't work properly. Half the keys were broken, and it only made sound if you hit them really hard. Most people would have thrown it away, but Rosa saw something special in it. She carried that broken keyboard up 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment and set it up in the corner of her bedroom. At night, after her roommates were asleep, Rosa would put on headphones and practice on the silent keys, just moving her fingers and imagining the music. She had found free piano lessons on the internet at the public library and watched them over and over until she memorized every movement. When she got home, she would practice what she had learned on her silent keyboard, her fingers dancing over keys that made no sound. After 6 months of this, Rosa had saved enough money to buy a small speaker that she could connect to the keyboard. Finally, she could hear the music she was making, even if it was just a whisper through tiny speakers. She had to keep the volume very low so she wouldn't wake her roommates or the neighbors. Every night, after working 10 or 12 hours at various cleaning jobs around the city, Rosa would come home exhausted. Her feet would hurt, her back would ache, and all she wanted to do was collapse into bed. But instead, she would sit at her little keyboard and practice. She learned slowly, making mistakes and starting over again and again. Her fingers were clumsy at first and the music sounded choppy and wrong. But Rosa was patient with herself. She had learned long ago that anything worth having required time and effort. Gradually, the music began to flow more naturally. Rosa discovered that she had good ears for melody and rhythm. When she heard a song on the radio or television, she could figure out how to play parts of it on her keyboard. She started combining pieces of different songs, creating her own arrangements that sounded beautiful even on her cheap little instrument. But Rosa never told anyone about her music. Her roommates thought she was just listening to music through headphones. Her co-workers at the Lincoln Center had no idea that the quiet cleaning lady dreamed of playing the very instrument she dusted every day. Rosa was afraid that people would laugh at her. A cleaning lady who thought she could play piano? It seemed impossible even to her sometimes. She was 32 years old, had never had a real lesson and could barely afford to buy food some weeks. Who was she to think she could make music? But every morning, when she cleaned around that beautiful grand piano in the practice room, Rosa felt something stirring in her heart. The music she practiced at night on her broken keyboard seemed to echo in this space, as if the piano was waiting for her to find the courage to try. She never imagined that one day someone would challenge her to do exactly that. It was a Thursday evening in October, and Rosa was running behind schedule. One of the other cleaners had called in sick, so Rosa had to cover extra areas of the building. The rain was coming down hard outside, and she could hear it drumming against the tall windows as she worked her way through the hallways. Usually, Rosa finished her work by 6 in the evening, but tonight it was already 7:30 and she still had the main practice room to clean. This was the room with the beautiful grand piano, and Rosa always saved it for last because it was her favorite part of the day. As she pushed her cart toward the practice room, Rosa heard voices coming from inside. That was strange. The schedule board outside showed that all rehearsals were supposed to be finished by 7. Maybe someone was working late. Rosa knocked gently on the door and waited. When no one answered, she slowly opened it and peeked inside. The room appeared empty, but she could hear 2 men talking in the hallway just outside another entrance. She decided to start cleaning quietly, hoping to finish before whoever was coming actually needed the room. Rosa began dusting the chairs and wiping down the music stands, working as quickly and quietly as possible. That's when she heard footsteps approaching. Rosa looked toward the door and saw a tall man with silver hair walking in. He was wearing an expensive black suit and had the kind of confident walk that suggested he owned whatever space he entered. Rosa had seen enough famous musicians come through these halls to recognize the type. The man stopped when he saw Rosa and checked his watch with obvious irritation. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that had a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "I have a rehearsal scheduled. Are you almost finished with whatever it is you're doing?" Rosa felt her cheeks get warm. She had been working in this building for 3 years, but famous musicians still made her nervous. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, immediately starting to pack up her cleaning supplies. "I didn't know anyone was coming. I'll be out of your way in just a minute." The man walked over to the piano and ran his fingers along its edge as if he was checking to make sure it was clean enough for his standards. Rosa noticed that his hands were perfectly manicured, not like her own rough, dry hands that showed the effects of years of cleaning chemicals. "Actually," he said, turning back to look at her, "there seems to be some confusion with the schedule. My accompanist isn't here yet, and I'm not sure when he's arriving." Rosa nodded and continued gathering her things, trying to become invisible. She had learned that the best way to deal with important people was to stay out of their way and not draw attention to herself. But as she moved around the room, Rosa found herself humming very softly under her breath. It was a habit she had developed over the years. Humming helped her work faster and made the time pass more pleasantly. Tonight she was humming a piece by Chopin that she had been practicing on her little keyboard at home. The man's head turned sharply toward her. "What was that?" he asked. Rosa froze. "I'm sorry, sir. Was I being too loud? I was just—" No, he said, walking closer to her. "What were you humming?" "That melody." Rosa felt her heart start beating faster. She had been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to do, and now this important person was paying attention to her. I don't know, sir. Just something I heard somewhere." The man studied her face carefully. "That was Chopin, Ballad No. 1, to be specific. It's not exactly the kind of music you hear on the radio." Rosa didn't know what to say. She clutched her cleaning cloth tighter and wished she could disappear. "Tell me," the man continued, "where did you hear this piece?" I think maybe I heard it here, in the building, while I was working," Rosa said quietly. The man smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just thought of something amusing. "I see. So you listen to classical music while you clean?" he asked. "Sometimes," Rosa admitted. "And do you know what this piece is about? The story behind it?" Rosa shook her head. She knew how to play parts of it, but she had never read about its history or meaning. "It's one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire," the man said, walking back toward the piano. "It requires years of training to perform properly. Most pianists don't even attempt it until they've been studying for at least a decade." Rosa nodded, not sure why he was telling her this. The man sat down on the piano bench and played a few measures of the piece Rosa had been humming. His fingers moved across the keys with incredible speed and precision, and the music filled the room with a richness that took Rosa's breath away. When he finished, he looked up at her with that same amused smile. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "The result of 15 years of intensive training, private tutors, and more money spent on education than you probably make in several years." Rosa felt her face burning with embarrassment. She understood now that he was making fun of her somehow, but she wasn't sure exactly how to respond. "Yes, sir. It's very beautiful," she said. The man stood up from the piano bench and gestured toward it. "You know what?" he said. "I'm curious about something. You seem to appreciate this music, so why don't you give it a try? Show me what you think piano playing looks like." Rosa stared at him in shock. "Oh no, sir, I couldn't. I don't know how to play." "Come now," the man said. "Surely someone who hums Chopin while cleaning must have some idea of how to make music. I'd love to hear your interpretation." The way he said interpretation made it clear that he expected her to make a fool of herself. Rosa realized that this was his idea of entertainment, watching the cleaning lady embarrass herself by trying to play a piano that cost more than she would earn in 10 years. "Really, sir, I don't think—" "I insist," he said, his voice becoming more firm. "Consider it educational for both of us." At that moment, 2 men with equipment cases walked into the room. They were clearly part of the technical crew setting up for some kind of recording or broadcast. "Mr. Volkov," one of them called out. "We're here for the sound check. Should we set up?" The man, Mr. Volkov, held up his hand. "Give us a few minutes. We're having an impromptu performance first." The crew members exchanged glances and began setting up their equipment anyway, clearly sensing that something interesting was about to happen. Rosa felt trapped. She was standing in a room with a famous pianist who was clearly making fun of her, while technical crew members were setting up equipment that would probably record whatever happened next. Every instinct told her to apologize again and leave, immediately. But something else was stirring inside her. Rosa thought about all those nights practicing on her broken keyboard. She thought about the music that lived in her heart, but that no one had ever heard. She thought about how this man assumed that someone like her couldn't possibly understand real music. Maybe it was time to show him that he was wrong. "Okay," Rosa said quietly, setting down her cleaning supplies. "I'll try." Rosa's hands were shaking as she walked toward the piano bench. Her heart was beating so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The grand piano seemed even bigger now that she was supposed to sit at it, not just clean around it. Mr. Volkov leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, clearly expecting to be entertained by her failure. The two crew members had stopped, setting up their equipment, and were watching with curious expressions. One of them had even pulled out his phone. Rosa sat down on the bench and immediately felt how different it was from the old chair she used at home with her broken keyboard. This bench was the perfect height, and it was positioned exactly the right distance from the keys. Everything about this piano was designed for making music, not like her makeshift setup in her tiny bedroom. She looked down at the keys and felt overwhelmed. These weren't the plastic keys of her little keyboard that you had to hit hard to make any sound. These were real piano keys, made of ivory and ebony, smooth and perfectly balanced. She was afraid that if she touched them wrong, she might damage something worth more than she could ever afford to replace. "Take your time," Mr. Volkov said, but his tone suggested he was already getting impatient. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment and tried to calm herself down. She thought about all those nights when she came home exhausted from work, but still sat at her keyboard to practice. She thought about the music that had kept her company during the loneliest moments of her life in this big city. When she opened her eyes, Rosa placed her hands gently on the keys. The feel was completely different from what she was used to. These keys responded to the slightest touch, and even pressing one very softly created a beautiful, clear sound that seemed to hang in the air. "Well," Mr. Volkov said, "we don't have all night." Rosa knew she had to start playing something, but her mind was blank. What could she possibly play that wouldn't make her look foolish in front of these people? She had been practicing pieces on her keyboard, but they were simple arrangements that she had figured out by ear. Nothing that would impress a real pianist. Then she remembered the piece she had been humming earlier, the Chopin ballad that had started this whole situation. She had been working on it for months, playing it over and over on her silent keyboard, until her fingers knew every movement by memory. Rosa placed her fingers in position and took a deep breath. She started with the opening notes, playing them very softly and carefully. The sound that came from the piano was nothing like what she was used to hearing from her little keyboard. It was rich and warm and filled the entire room with music. Mr. Volkov's eyebrows went up slightly, but his expression remained skeptical. Playing a few notes correctly was one thing. The real test would come when the piece got more complicated. Rosa continued playing, and with each measure she felt more confident. Her fingers seemed to know exactly where to go, even though these keys felt different from what she practiced on. The muscle memory from hundreds of hours of practice was taking over, and her body was remembering how to make music. But something else was happening too. As Rosa played, she began to feel the emotions behind the music in a way she never had before. On her little keyboard at home, she had focused mainly on getting the notes right. But on this beautiful piano, she could hear how the music was supposed to sound, and she began to understand what the composer was trying to say. The piece grew, more complex, with rapid runs and challenging chord progressions. Rosa's fingers moved faster, dancing across the keys with a grace that surprised even her. She had practiced these passages so many times that they felt natural now, but hearing them on a real piano was like hearing them for the first time. Mr. Volkov straightened up from the wall, his casual posture replaced by focused attention. The crew members had stopped what they were doing entirely and were watching Rosa with growing amazement. As the music continued, Rosa forgot where she was. She forgot about the famous pianist watching her, forgot about the crew members, forgot about her cleaning cart sitting in the corner. All that existed was the music flowing from her fingers and the incredible sound of this magnificent instrument responding to her touch. She had practiced this piece so many times that she knew exactly how long each phrase should be, where to slow down, where to build intensity. But now, playing on a real piano, Rosa discovered she could add subtle touches that her little keyboard had never allowed. The way certain notes could ring out longer, the way she could control the volume of individual fingers to bring out melodies hidden within the harmony. The most challenging section of the piece was coming up, a passage that required her left hand and right hand to play completely independent melodies while maintaining perfect timing. Rosa had struggled with this part for weeks when she first learned it, but now her hands moved with confidence and precision. Mr. Volkov was no longer leaning casually against the wall. He had moved closer to the piano, studying Rosa's technique with an expression that was no longer amused or condescending. It was the look of someone witnessing something unexpected and remarkable. One of the crew members whispered to the other, "Are you getting this?" The second man nodded and adjusted his phone to make sure he was capturing everything. Rosa reached the climax of the piece, where the music builds to a powerful, emotional peak before settling into a gentler conclusion. Her whole body was involved now, not just her fingers, but her arms, her shoulders, even the way she breathed with the rhythm of the music. She had never experienced anything like this before. Playing music on her little keyboard had been satisfying, but this was something completely different. This was what music was supposed to feel like. Not just sounds coming from an instrument, but emotions being translated directly from her heart, through her fingers, into something that other people could hear and feel. As Rosa approached the ending of the piece, she realized that she had been playing for several minutes without making any significant mistakes. More than that, she had been making music, real music that filled this beautiful room and touched something deep inside everyone who was listening. The final notes of the piece required delicate control, getting softer and softer until the music faded into silence. Rosa played these last measures with a tenderness that came from understanding what the composer had intended. The music needed to end like a whisper, like a secret being shared between the piano and anyone willing to listen. When the last note faded away, the room was completely silent. Rosa sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, hardly believing what had just happened. She had actually done it. She had played one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire on a concert grand piano, and it had sounded good. She looked up to see three faces staring at her with expressions of complete shock. Mr. Volkov's mouth was slightly open, and he seemed to have forgotten how to speak. The crew members were looking at each other as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Rosa suddenly felt embarrassed again. Maybe it hadn't sounded as good as she thought. Maybe they were shocked by how badly she had played, not how well. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, starting to stand up from the bench. "I know it wasn't very good. I've only been practicing for a couple of years and I've never played on a real piano before." That's when Mr. Volkov finally found his voice. "Wait," he said, his voice completely different from the condescending tone he had used before. "Please, don't apologize, that was... Where did you learn to play like that?" Rosa looked down at her hands still resting on the piano keys. She didn't know how to answer Mr. Volkov's question. How could she explain that she had learned everything from free videos on library computers and countless hours practicing on a broken keyboard in her tiny bedroom? I taught myself," she said quietly. "I watch videos online sometimes when I can get to the library." Mr. Volkov stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. "You taught yourself? That piece you just played. Do you understand what you just did?" Rosa shook her head. She knew she had played the notes correctly mostly, but she could tell from his expression that something more had happened. "That was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor," Mr. Volkov said, walking closer to the piano. "It's considered one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. Professional pianists spend years perfecting it. Many never attempt it at all." One of the crew members stepped forward. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind, but I recorded that. I've never heard anything like it. The way you played, and it gave me chills." Rosa felt her cheeks getting hot again. "I'm sure it wasn't that good. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Mr. Volkov laughed, but this time it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the laugh of someone who couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Yes, there were small technical imperfections. But what you just did, the musical interpretation, the emotion, the natural phrasing, those are things that can't be taught. They come from somewhere much deeper." He sat down in one of the chairs facing the piano. "Tell me about this keyboard you practice on. Rosa described her little electronic keyboard with the broken keys, how she had to hit some of them extra hard to make sound, how she practiced with headphones so she wouldn't disturb her roommates. She told him about staying up late after work, learning pieces bit by bit from watching videos over and over. "How long have you been doing this?" Mr. Volkov asked. "About 2 years," Rosa said. "Maybe a little more." The second crew member whistled softly. 2 years? I took piano lessons for 8 years as a kid, and I couldn't play anything close to that. Mr. Volkov was quiet for a long moment, studying Rosa's face. "Would you play something else?" he asked. "Something different?" Rosa hesitated. "I don't know very many pieces all the way through, and I've never played on a piano like this before tonight." "Play whatever you know," he said. "Whatever feels natural to you." Rosa thought for a moment, then placed her hands back on the keys. This time she started with something simpler, a piece by Debussy called Clair de Lune, that she had learned because it reminded her of the quiet nights in her village back home. But as she began playing, Rosa realized that simple didn't mean easy. This piece required a completely different kind of control. Not the dramatic power of the Chopin, but a gentle, floating quality that was much harder to achieve. On her little keyboard, she had never been able to create the soft, dreamy sounds that this music demanded. On the grand piano, though, Rosa discovered she could make the notes whisper. She could play so softly that the music seemed to float in the air like moonlight. The piano responded to her slightest touch, allowing her to create colors and textures she had only imagined before. As she played, Rosa found herself thinking about her mother back home, probably lying in bed and looking out the window at the same moon that Rosa could see through the tall windows of this concert hall. The music became a bridge between her two worlds, the life she had left behind and the life she was trying to build here. Mr. Volkov closed his eyes as he listened. The crew members had completely forgotten about their equipment and were sitting in chairs, absorbed in the music. When Rosa finished the Debussy piece, she didn't stop. Without really thinking about it, she transitioned into a folk song from her childhood, but played it in the style of classical music she had been learning. She had never tried this before, but somehow it felt natural to combine the melody that had been part of her life since she was small with the techniques she had been practicing. The result was something entirely unique, not quite classical, not quite folk music, but something new that belonged completely to Rosa. It was the sound of her own story, told through music. "That was beautiful," said one of the crew members when she finished. "What was that last piece?" "It's a song my grandmother used to sing to me," Rosa said. I don't know why I played it like that." Mr. Volkov opened his eyes and looked at Rosa with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Do you realize what just happened?" he asked. Rosa shook her head. "You took a traditional melody and created your own classical arrangement of it, improvising it in real time. That's something that most trained musicians never learn to do. It requires an intuitive understanding of harmony and structure that usually takes decades to develop." He stood up and began pacing around the room. "This is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. In 30 years of professional music, I have never encountered anything like this." The crew member who had been recording looked at his phone screen. "This is going to go viral," he said. "The way you played, the story behind it, that people need to see this." Rosa felt a moment of panic. "Oh no, please don't put that on the internet. I could get in trouble at work. I'm not supposed to be using the piano." Mr. Volkov stopped pacing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rosa Gutierrez." "Rosa," he said, "I think you might be worrying about the wrong things right now." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Antonio, it's Dmitry Volkov. Cancel my rehearsal tonight. Something extraordinary has happened, and I need to talk to you immediately." Rosa listened to one side of a conversation she couldn't fully understand. Mr. Volkov mentioned her name several times, and she heard words like prodigy and natural talent and immediate scholarship consideration. When he hung up the phone, Mr. Volkov turned back to Rosa. "That was the director of admissions at the conservatory. He's coming here right now to meet you." "The conservatory?" Rosa asked. "The Manhattan School of Music," Mr. Volkov explained, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Antonio and I have been colleagues for 20 years. When I told him what I just witnessed, he decided he needs to hear you play himself. Rosa felt dizzy. But I'm just a cleaning lady. I don't have money for school. I never even finished high school properly. Rosa, Mr. Volkov said gently, what you have can't be bought with money or learned in any school. What you have is a gift that appears maybe once in a generation. And if Antonio agrees with me, money will not be a problem. One of the crew members was scrolling through his phone. The video I posted is already getting thousands of views, he said. People are sharing it everywhere. Rosa looked around the room, at the expensive piano she had just played, at the famous musician who was making phone calls about her future, at the crew members who were treating her like she was someone important. Just 2 hours ago, she had been worried about finishing her cleaning duties on time. I don't understand what's happening, she said. Mr. Volkov smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. What's happening, Rosa, is that your life is about to change completely. And you're going to change a lot of other lives too, with that gift of yours. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Rosa looked toward the windows and wondered if this was all a dream she would wake up from in her tiny apartment in Queens. But the piano keys were still warm under her fingers, and the music was still echoing in her heart. This was real. Somehow, incredibly, this was all real. Rosa barely slept that night. She kept replaying everything that had happened, wondering if it had all been some kind of strange dream. But when she checked her phone in the morning, she found dozens of missed calls and text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. The video of her playing had spread across the internet overnight. Millions of people had watched the cleaning lady who could play classical piano like a master. The comments were overwhelming, people from around the world sharing their own stories of hidden dreams and unexpected talents. At 7 in the morning, Rosa's phone rang. It was Mr. Volkov. Rosa, I hope I didn't wake you, he said. I wanted to call before you went to work today. Don't go in. What do you mean? Rosa asked, confused. The building manager has already agreed to give you time off to explore these new opportunities. And frankly, after last night, I don't think you'll be cleaning floors much longer. 3 hours later, Rosa found herself sitting in the office of Antonio Rodriguez, the director of admissions at the Manhattan School of Music. The office was filled with photographs of famous musicians and awards from decades of excellence in music education. Mr. Rodriguez was a kind man in his 60s with gray hair and gentle eyes. He had listened to the recording from the night before, but he wanted to hear Rosa play in person. I have to be honest with you, Rosa, he said. In 40 years of music education, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. We typically require years of formal training, music theory knowledge, and demonstrated technique before we even consider someone for admission. Rosa's heart sank. She had been foolish to think that one good performance could change everything. However, Mr. Rodriguez continued, what you demonstrated last night goes far beyond technical training. You have something that cannot be taught, an intuitive understanding of music that is extraordinarily rare. He led Rosa to a practice room with a beautiful grand piano, similar to the one she had played the night before. Would you play something for me? He asked. Rosa sat at the piano and played the same Chopin piece from the night before. But this time, in the quiet of the practice room with just Mr. Rodriguez listening, she felt even more connected to the music. She could hear subtleties in the sound that she had missed before, and she found herself adding small interpretive touches that felt completely natural. When she finished, Mr. Rodriguez was quiet for a long time. Rosa, he said finally, I'm going to offer you something that we've never offered anyone before. A full scholarship to our master's program, with one condition. What condition? Rosa asked. You'll need to spend the next year doing intensive catch-up work in music theory and technique. It will be like cramming 8 years of formal training into 12 months. It will be the hardest year of your life. Rosa thought about her little apartment in Queens, her cleaning jobs, the money she sent home to her family every month. I can't afford to stop working, she said. My family depends on the money I send them. Mr. Rodriguez smiled. The scholarship includes a living stipend. It's not luxury, but it's enough to cover your basic needs and continue supporting your family. Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes. It seemed too good to be true. Over the next few days, Rosa's life became a whirlwind of phone calls, interviews, and opportunities she had never imagined. The video of her performance continued to spread, and news outlets wanted to tell her story. But Rosa was careful about which interviews she accepted. She didn't want her 15 minutes of fame to fade before she had a chance to really develop her talent. Mr. Volkov became an unexpected mentor and friend. He apologized many times for his initial behavior, admitting that his arrogance had nearly caused him to miss witnessing something extraordinary. "You taught me something important that night," he told Rosa during one of their practice sessions. "I had forgotten why I fell in love with music in the first place. Watching you play reminded me that music isn't about showing off or proving how much you know. It's about touching people's hearts." Rosa began her intensive music education program in January. The first few months were overwhelming. She had to learn music theory concepts that other students had been studying since childhood. She had to unlearn some of the techniques she had taught herself and replace them with proper form that would prevent injury during long practice sessions. But Rosa's natural musicality made up for her lack of formal training. She absorbed information quickly and could apply new concepts immediately to her playing. Her teachers were amazed by how fast she progressed. The hardest part wasn't the studying or the long practice hours. It was dealing with the attention her story had brought. Some people supported her and were inspired by her journey, but others criticized her, saying she didn't deserve opportunities that had been taken away from students who had been training their whole lives. Rosa learned to ignore the negative comments and focus on her music. She practiced 6 to 8 hours every day, gradually building up her repertoire and refining her technique. Her hands, which had been roughened by years of cleaning work, slowly became the hands of a pianist. 6 months into her program, Rosa gave her first formal recital. The small concert hall was packed with students, faculty, and music lovers who had been following her story. In the audience were her roommates from Queens, Mr. Volkov, Mr. Rodriguez, and even some of her former co-workers from the Lincoln Center. Rosa played a program that included the Chopin piece that had started everything, the Debussy that had showed her what the piano could really do, and a new piece she had been working on, a classical arrangement of folk songs from her homeland. But the most special moment came at the end, when Rosa played an original composition she had written. It was a musical story about her journey from a small village in Guatemala to this concert hall in Manhattan. The piece combined classical techniques with melodies from her childhood, creating something that was uniquely hers. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded for several minutes. Rosa saw tears on many faces, including her own. After the recital, a woman approached Rosa backstage. "My name is Carmen Silva," she said. "I'm a music producer, and I'd like to talk to you about recording an album." Rosa learned that Carmen specialized in working with artists who brought classical music to new audiences. She was interested in Rosa's ability to combine different musical traditions and her gift for making classical music accessible to people who might never set foot in a concert hall. 1 year after that rainy night when Mr. Volkov had challenged her to play piano, Rosa graduated from her intensive program with highest honors. She was accepted into the master's degree program and offered several performance opportunities around the city. But the most meaningful moment came when Rosa was able to bring her mother and brother to New York for her graduation ceremony. Her mother's medical bills were finally under control, thanks to Rosa's scholarship stipend and the money she had started earning from small performances. As Rosa walked across the stage to receive her certificate, she looked out at the audience and saw her family in the front row. Her mother was crying, and her brother was grinning with pride. After the ceremony, Rosa's mother took her hands and looked at the fingers that had once been cracked and dry from cleaning chemicals, now smooth and strong from hours of piano practice. "I always knew you were meant for something special," her mother said in Spanish. "But I never imagined it would be this beautiful." That evening, Rosa returned to the practice room where she had first played for Mr. Rodriguez. She sat at the piano and played softly, thinking about how much her life had changed. She was no longer the invisible cleaning lady who dreamed of making music. She was Rosa Gutierrez, pianist and composer, with a future full of possibilities she was still discovering. But the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Music was still the language of her heart, the way she made sense of the world and the bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. As she played the last notes of her practice session, Rosa smiled. Tomorrow she would start working on a new piece, a piano concerto that would premiere with the city orchestra next spring. The girl from the small village who had once only dreamed of touching a piano was now creating music that would be heard around the world. Sometimes, Rosa thought, the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to take a chance on a dream that seems impossible, until it isn't impossible anymore.